They came by the busload, gathered in villages throughout Cambodia, about to witness history in the making.
នៅថ្ងៃនេះសវនាការនេះនៅចំពោះមុខប្រជាជនកម្ពុជានិងពិភពលោកជាយូរមកហើយដែលនៅទីបំផុតដំណើរការនេះបានចាប់ដើមឡើងហើយយុត្តិធម៌នឹងត្រូវធ្វើបានសម្រេច
It's the first tribunal ever held in the nation where the atrocities were committed. It will put on the record secrets that many in this small Southeast Asian country want buried. It's been accused of being too expensive, too slow, too late. But for at least one of the victims of Cambodia's nightmare, it is as essential as air.
ឲ្យរឿងរដ្ឋាភិបាលយើងនឹងឲ្យមានច្បាប់កាត់ទោសខ្មែរក្រហមកាលណាយើងមិនបានកាត់ទោសដូចជារូបខ្ញុំដូចជារូបអូនឯងថ្ងៃក្រោយធ្វើបានដូចគ្នាទេ
Chumay is haunted by powerful memories. His wife and 3 children were among the murdered. He was imprisoned and tortured. He cannot rest until his tormentor is held accountable.
ប្រធានគុកទួលថ្លៃហ្នឹងតែខ្ញុំអត់ដើរឃើញមុខវាទេឮតែគេថាទេពួកកូនខ្ញុំជំនាន់ក្រោយវាអត់ដឹងថានឹងមេអានេះឧក្រិដ្ឋជនសម្លាប់គ្មានត្រាបណ្ណ័យ
Who was Doik? Was he a master of criminals responsible for thousands of deaths? Or was he also a victim of the Khmer Rouge? This is the story of 2 men and a nation's long-delayed quest for justice. It all began in the 1970s. Southeast Asia was in turmoil. The Vietnam War was winding down, but civil war raged in neighboring Cambodia. On April the 17th, 1975, the communist Khmer Rouge seized power. Within 24 hours, Cambodia's capital, Phnom Penh, was emptied out. Its residents forcibly marched into the countryside with little but what they could carry. Those who resisted were shot.
ចឹងខ្ញុំរត់ទៅអាផ្ទះខ្ញុំណារត់ទៅផ្ទះខ្ញុំនាំប្រពន្ធកូនអីរៀបចំអីវ៉ាន់ចុះមកដើម្បីធ្វើដំណើរចេញពីទីក្រុងភ្នំពេញ
Chumay was a 45-year-old mechanic when he was forced from Phnom Penh at gunpoint. The Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, were determined to return Cambodia to what they called Year Zero, an agrarian society. Most Cambodians were forced to labor in the fields. There would be no professionals, no schools, no money. But even as the population obeyed, the increasingly paranoid regime questioned everyone's loyalties, including Chummay's. On October 28, 1978, he was separated from his family, told he was being taken to repair vehicles. Instead, he was taken here to the notorious Tul Slang prison, a former school now known as S21.
ខ្ញុំជាប់ខ្នោះដៃអញ្ចឹងជាប់ខ្នោះដៃចេះតែអញ្ចឹងទៅហើយអាមុខវាចងកមាជាប់ចេះដើរអញ្ចឹងទៅដើរចូលមកអញ្ចឹងបានទៅអញ្ចឹងទៅវាបដើររហូតទៅអញ្ចឹង
S21's inmates were teachers, lawyers, journalists. Each one meticulously photographed, men, women, and children.
អាកន្លែងនេះកន្លែងដាក់ខ្ញុំនេះមកខ្ញុំនាំមកទុកខ្ញុំអា022នេះកន្លែងដាក់ចង្វាក់ដល់ហើយវាដាក់ចង្វាក់ជើងអញ្ចឹងយើងដេកបាទហើយតែយើងប្រែខ្លួនលឺសូរចង្វាក់អាហ្នឹងវាយ50ពាត់អី100ពាត់អីវាយយើង
On Chummay's first day at S21, he was taken for interrogation inside this room. its floor already covered in blood. The objective, to force him to confess to supposed foreign loyalties.
Ai phép anh tròn mau, háo kim thắng bong ai kim ọt miên CA KCB na thế kim ọt squallเลยเราให้việcตระมันนวงราวจังมองตระนวงราวจังดักหุ่มพัง
The initial interrogations and torture continued for 12 agonizing days.
ดอกอ่อนนี่ดอกเยอะdùng hết miền cầm hấu ấy mà ấy quậy dùng quậy dân nó cứ ấy nhưng mà bảo cho miền cầm hấu tới cho mình ta đi để cho anh miền cầm hấu ấy mà quậy dân nó.
This brutal treatment was meted out routinely, says this former interrogator.
Chồng đáy nó chặn chỗ đáy đọ chó cáp.
Prak Korn, then just 20 years old, was taught to torture at S21.
Cái phần riêng vì lực biệt thư tổ đơn cam lực biệt prao chất xa lực biệt prao nhiều bài.
He was prison director Kangek Io, known as Comrade Doik. A former science teacher, Doik now taught the art of cruelty.
Bao nhiêu plastic á, chợ rung chích, oi thọc đọ đằng hầm nhưng mưa thà đằng thọc láng mà nọ làng mình, rồi thà một bạn mà đấy.
But for inmates he deemed useful, Doik had special plans. Prisoner Van Nat had been an artist. Doik ordered him to paint portraits of Khmer Rouge leader Pol Pot. Van Nat, who had been tortured at S21 so severely he could barely walk, knew that other artists before him had tried to please Doik. Most could not and were quickly put to death.
Về nó nhóm đào lấy ruồi trong ruồi hết nè, mình là tập hiệp ấy từ cá bữa trưa mình chọn họ nâng mà khai chuyện ấy.
Van Nat put his dark memories of those desperate days on canvas. The babies snatched from their mothers, the waterboarding, and other brutal torture techniques.
Dạ, samai nó về, anh dương ta nửa độ thang cả đá, thầy sám tập chọn nè, rùm mình lúc để dừng mơ ta nó về, vì mình đang làm, tay riêng cái với mình nộp về.
Responsible for all of it, he says, was one man, Doik.
Dương mơ ta mình xăm chỉ nè xả hao sao, mình xăm chỉ nè xăm làm một lúc đó nặng nó nghe pro.
But thousands were killed. In fact, trucks rumbled out of S21 every night at midnight, taking away prisoners to be executed at nearby killing fields. Hearing this was its own kind of torture.
Nơi cái nông mong bay mong muốn là nâng dương ọt để lụa thế dương đăng đà mình đăng kim đăng dương rồi mua tới nâng đăng kim đăng dương thế. Đó là mong pin đop giúp ở bàn dương để lụa. Vì giờ tới sầm lấp nơi bằng chương ấy nhá.
But even then, sleep was elusive. Too many other terrible sounds echoed in the night.
Vì luôn chia cái lay nhỉ đây sầm rây lư từng pin mà nâng từng o thôi. À côn dung của miên mà đai dung của miên, à phục dung của miên. À máy cái vay nó tới à côn dung nơi nâng tới.
It was all too much for some prisoners. Many attempted suicide.
Class, đợt chụp kiêng oi phải xe ấy chẳng do chụp kiêng trên cát đó, chặt sỏi lực luôn, do phượng nó đọt luôn ai, class, do bệnh nhà xe đó, bệnh nhà bệnh chật cả, nhưng mà chạm phong co chạy luôn ai
ខ្ញុំរកកន្លែងលោតសម្លាប់ខ្លួនដែរប៉ុន្តែចម្រឹងនឹងវាជាប់ខ្ញុំថាលោតសម្លាប់ខ្លួនរបស់ខ្ញុំឡើយ
Salvation came on December the 25th, 1979. Vietnam, which had been the target of Khmer Rouge attacks, invaded Cambodia and overthrew the Pol Pot regime. Comrade Doik and the guards fled. Then the gates of S-21 swung open and its secrets spilled out. At least 15,000 people had been imprisoned here. Only 12 survived. Among them, 4 children, the artist Van Nat and Chum May. Chum May ran, desperate to find his wife. Remarkably, he did. She was carrying their baby. But in the chaos, gunfire broke out. Chum May's wife and child were tragically shot dead.
ប្រពន្ធខ្ញុំថាអូនអើយគូនៅវាសម្លាប់ប្រពន្ធខ្ញុំកូន3នៅនេះនៅដៃវាយកទៅសម្លាប់ខ្ញុំមកដល់កន្លែងនឹងពេលណាទឹកភ្នែកពេលហ្នឹង
The full measure of Cambodia's tragedy was stunning. Nearly 2 million, 1 in every 4 Cambodians had died. Many of starvation, exhaustion and disease. Tens of thousands more executed at killing fields like this one. It was not until UN-brokered elections in 1993 that a degree of political stability finally came to Cambodia. Now, Chum May and so many other victims could finally demand a reckoning.
ក៏យើងត្រូវតែកាត់ដើម្បីឲ្យអាដែងគ្នាដែងអាកូនចៅស្លាប់ទៅប្តីប្រពន្ធស្លាប់ទៅឲ្យអស់ចិត្តផង
The international community agreed. The most senior Khmer Rouge leaders would have to be prosecuted. But could Cambodia, where only 7 lawyers survived the Khmer Rouge, hold a legitimate trial? Negotiations would drag on for years. But at long last, an historic UN-supported tribunal was approved. The verdict would be decided by an international panel of judges, some Cambodian, some foreign. Case number 1 finally began in early 2009, more than 30 years after the atrocities were committed. The first defendant, held behind bulletproof glass, was the alleged mastermind of S-21's machinery of death, Comrade Doik. The charges: murder, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Co-prosecutor Chia Liang began.
ក៏ភ័ស្តុតាងនឹងបង្ហាញឲ្យឃើញថាឧក្រិដ្ឋកម្មទាំងឡាយរបស់គាត់គឺជាផ្នែកការវាយប្រហារដែលមានលក្ខណៈទូលំទូលាយនិងជាប្រព័ន្ធទៅលើប្រជាជនកម្ពុជាដែរ
In the packed courtroom sat Chum May, now 79, as his former captor made a dramatic confession.
ខ្ញុំសូមទទួលស្គាល់នៅការទទួលខុសត្រូវរបស់ខ្ញុំតាមផ្លូវច្បាប់ខ្ញុំសូមបញ្ជាក់ថាតាមផ្លូវច្បាប់ចំពោះអក្រិតកម្មទាំងអស់ដែលកើតមាននៅស21សំខាន់គឺសកម្មភាពធ្វើទារុណកម្មនិងសម្លាប់ប្រតិបត្តិអាយុជីវិតមនុស្ស
But Doik, now 67, insisted he had no choice. It was obey or die.
នេះជាបញ្ហាស្លាប់រស់របស់ខ្ញុំនិងគ្រួសារខ្ញុំក្នុងឋានៈខ្ញុំជាប្រធានស21ខ្ញុំអត់ហ៊ានគិតរគូរកលទ្ធភាពអីកាលពីអនុវត្តតាមបទបញ្ជារបស់ថ្នាក់លើទេទោះបីខ្ញុំដឹងថាការអនុវត្តនោះនាំទៅរកការបាត់បង់អាយុជីវិតមនុស្សរាប់ពាន់នាក់ក៏ដោយ
Did Doik order torture and killings willingly or out of fear? Was he a zealot or a pawn? The trial would pivot on these questions. Co-prosecutor William Smith.
The defence will say that he was a victim of the regime, had no choice, hated his job, and only carried out these acts because he was under threat of death. It's not a valid defence, duress of itself.
Duch acted out of conviction, not coercion, says Smith.
He was, say, a crusader, someone that wanted the revolution, the communist revolution, and did everything he could to achieve that.
Everything, including devising ingenious methods of torture and teaching them, as former interrogator Prak Korn testified. As for the question of duress, Van Nat, the artist who had survived on Duch's whim, testified that Duch never appeared scared or anxious.
On prend en considération, pour juger une personne, tous les éléments.
Defense attorney Francois Roux argues that Duch was not born an executioner, he became one.
Au début, il s'engage dans la révolution, il est plein de bonne volonté. Après, il a commencé à mettre la main, et puis le bras, et puis tout entier. Qui peut dire aujourd'hui que placé dans la même situation, cette situation qui devient petit à petit une situation de terreur absolue.
What's more, Roux contends Duch is now full of remorse. He says everyone, including Duch's victims, could see that when, as part of the trial, the court took him back to S21, the site of his crimes. As he waited to speak, Duch broke down. Duch was about to confront the misery he had inflicted when Chum described his torture. But what would Duch's apologies mean to Chum? When he finally testified more than a year later, Cambodia got its answer. The scars of his miserable days at Tuol Sleng prison are still raw.
So, what is a just sentence for this accused? Do you believe him when he says he was a hostage and a prisoner of the regime from 1971?
Where the judges stood on that question would determine Duch's punishment. Co-prosecutor Smith implored the court to remember the thousands of Duch's defenceless victims.
Your Honours should be mindful of the dreams and opportunities that were denied. But the whole of humanity demands a just and proportionate response to these crimes. And this court must speak on behalf of that humanity.
Smith demanded a sentence of 40 years in prison. while defense attorney Rouge argued that Duic's contrition warrants a sentence of time served.
Qui pourra contester les larmes de l'accusé? Duc a déjà payé le mal qu'il a fait. Renvoyez-le chez lui.
But in the trial's final hours, Rouge and everyone else was in for a shock. Despite the fact that Duic had confessed several times, suddenly his other defense attorney, Savuth, demanded a total acquittal. He argued that more senior members of the Khmer Rouge, not Duic, were responsible.
គឺគាត់ជាអ្នកអបញ្ជារបស់បកកុម្មុយនីសកម្ពុជាដូច្នេះបកកុម្មុយនីសកម្ពុជាគឺជាឃាតករសម្រាប់ប្រជាជនកម្ពុជារាប់លានអ្នកសូមអង្គជំនុំជម្រះមេត្តាលើកលែងចោទប្រកាន់ឈ្មោះកាំងកិច្ចអ៊ីវហៅដូចពីបទចោទខាងលើ
Even Duic seemed startled by his lawyer's about face.
ខ្ញុំនឹងតែរក្សាគោលជំហរទទួលខុសត្រូវចំពោះជាតិប្រជាជនខ្ញុំក្នុងឋានៈខ្ញុំជាបេក្ខជនមួយរូបដែលជាបកអក្រិត
In an atmosphere of confusion, the court adjourned to deliberate. More than 8 months later, the judges filed in to deliver their verdict.
អង្គជំរះរកឃើញថាកាំងកិច្ចអ៊ីវមានវិរុទ្ធភាព
Guilty on all counts. The sentence, 35 years in prison. Minus the time he has already served, Duic will be incarcerated for another 19 years. He showed no emotion, but outside, Khmer was devastated. For him, the sentence was a travesty. ដែលកាប់សម្លាប់មនុស្សអស់រាប់លានលុយអស់រាប់លានដុល្លារហើយអាអ្នកកាប់សម្លាប់គេឲ្យរួចទោសអញ្ចឹងតើបងប្អូនសប្បាយចិត្តទេខ្ញុំអត់សប្បាយចិត្តទេខ្ញុំសម្រក់ទឹកភ្នែកមួយសាទៀតហើយបងប្អូនខ្ញុំសម្រក់ទឹកភ្នែកមួយសាទៀតហើយ For Duic's victims, it is now more important than ever to keep the memory of those who perished alive. Van Nat's paintings are his tribute to the dead.
ដែលបានស្លាប់ទៅហ្នឹងវាមិនអត់ប្រយោជន៍វាមិនត្រូវតែគេកុំតិចឲ្យទៅជាផង្ការឯកសារវានៅសល់ការចងចាំវានៅសល់ផុសតាងខ្លះ
Khmer continues to bear witness. He spends his days at S21, now a memorial to the dead. Despite his disappointment, he is proud of his testimony in the trial that finally forced his homeland to confront its terrible history.
សម្រាប់សំខាន់ណាខ្ញុំចង់កុំឲ្យដែលខ្ញុំស្លាប់ទៅកូនចៅខ្ញុំជំនាន់ក្រោយវាថាអាតាហ្នឹងដឹងរឿងរ៉ាវអីខ្មែរក្រហមកាប់សម្លាប់ប្រជាជនអស់រាប់លានអ្នកគាត់អត់និយាយប្រាប់ឯងមួយម៉ាត់គាត់ស្លាប់ទៅបាត់ឈឹង